Emma Hale had always believed that love, when it was real, felt quiet and safe rather than loud and dramatic. That belief was what made her fall for Ryan Mercer in the first place. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention when he walked into a room. He smiled easily, listened carefully, and spoke with a confidence that felt earned rather than forced. When he laughed, it wasn't loud, but it lingered. People remembered it. They met at a charity fundraiser hosted by her father's company. Emma had only attended because Mr. Hale insisted she start, showing her face, at events that mattered. She hated the spotlight, hated the way people's eyes weighed her last name before they ever bothered to know her. Ryan, on the other hand, had been there as a junior project consultant, nervous in an ill-fitting suit, clutching a drink he barely touched. She noticed him because he looked out of place, just like she felt. Their first conversation was simple. He asked her what she thought of the music. She admitted it was too loud. He laughed and said he'd been thinking the same thing but didn't want to sound ungrateful. It was the kind of honesty that disarmed her. They spent the rest of the evening talking in a quiet corner, sharing stories about childhood, favorite books, and the strange pressure of becoming someone people expected you to be. Ryan came from modest beginnings. He talked about his mother, a nurse who worked double shifts to put him through school, and his late father, a mechanic who taught him the value of discipline and pride. Emma listened, genuinely moved. Her own life had been comfortable, even luxurious, but emotionally restrained. Mr. Hale had provided everything except warmth. Her mother had passed away when she was young, and since then, the house had always felt too large, too quiet. Ryan made it feel smaller, warmer. When she introduced him to her father months later, Mr. Hale's polite smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He shook Ryan's hand firmly, asked about his work, his plans, his ambitions. Ryan answered confidently, respectfully, but Emma noticed the way her father studied him, as though measuring something invisible. Later that night, Mr. Hale spoke carefully. He didn't forbid the relationship. He never raised his voice. He simply said, "Love is important, Emma, but character lasts longer. Be sure you truly know the man you choose." Emma smiled, kissed her father's cheek, and told him not to worry. She was sure. She had never been more sure of anything. Their courtship was steady and sincere. Ryan called when he said he would. He showed up on time. He remembered small details. How she liked her tea, the way she frowned when she was thinking, how she hummed without realizing it when she was nervous. Emma felt seen in a way she never had before. When he proposed, it wasn't extravagant. No cameras, no audience, just the two of them at a quiet lakeside, Ryan's hands shaking slightly as he asked her to marry him. She said yes without hesitation. The wedding was elegant but understated. Mr. Hale paid for everything, though he kept his involvement minimal. He walked Emma down the aisle with a proud but unreadable expression. Ryan looked at Emma as though she were the only person in the world. When he promised to love and protect her, she believed him with her whole heart. Married life began gently. They moved into a spacious home not far from her father's estate. Emma decorated slowly, carefully, turning rooms into places of comfort rather than display. Ryan threw himself into his career, often talking about future promotions, investments, and the life he planned to build for them. Emma encouraged him, proud of his drive, believing it came from a desire to provide. When she found out she was pregnant, the news felt unreal. She sat alone in the bathroom, staring at the test in her trembling hands. A laugh bubbled up through her tears. She pressed a hand to her stomach, already protective, already in love. Ryan's reaction was perfect. He lifted her off the floor, spinning her around, laughing in disbelief. He promised to be the best father. He talked about teaching the child to ride a bike, about bedtime stories, about being everything his own father had been and more. Emma watched his face glow with excitement and felt certain she had chosen well. Pregnancy softened her world. She spent mornings reading parenting books and afternoons sketching nursery ideas. She wrote letters to her unborn child, tucking them into a small wooden box she planned to give them one day. She imagined family dinners, holidays, laughter echoing through the house. Ryan, at first, seemed supportive. He attended doctor's appointments, held her hand during ultrasounds, smiled at the grainy images on the screen. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. He stayed out later. His phone was always face down. When Emma asked how his day had been, his answers grew shorter. He seemed distracted, restless, as though something was pulling him away. Emma told herself she was imagining it. Pregnancy made women emotional, everyone said so. She didn't want to be that wife, the suspicious one, the needy one. Still, there were moments that unsettled her. Ryan would sigh when she fell asleep early, complaining about her fatigue. He teased her about how much time she spent talking about the baby. Once, when she suggested a quiet night in, he laughed and said, "You're starting to sound like an old woman already." He apologized afterward, but the words lingered. Emma tried harder. She dressed up even when she was tired. She listened patiently when Ryan talked about work frustrations. She told herself marriage required effort, that love meant choosing each other every day. What she didn't see was how Ryan's dreams were changing. The ambition he once framed as providing for his family was slowly warping into something sharper, darker. He watched wealthy men at company events and wondered why he was still waiting for success instead of taking it. He looked at Emma's gentle trust and mistook it for weakness. At night, as Emma slept beside him with a hand resting protectively on her growing belly, Ryan stared at the ceiling, restless. He felt trapped by responsibility he hadn't fully understood when he'd promised forever. The life he imagined now glittered with excess, excitement, and freedom, things he feared were slipping away. Emma sensed none of this clearly. She only felt a quiet ache she couldn't name, a subtle distance growing between the man she loved and the future she dreamed of. Still, she believed in love. She believed in patience. She believed that the family they were building would bring them closer again. She didn't know that the beginning she cherished so deeply was already cracking beneath the surface, or that the man she trusted was quietly stepping away from everything she thought they shared. Answer, in the glow of hope and expectation, Emma held on to her happiness, unaware that the perfect beginning was already giving way to a far more painful truth. By the 5th month of her pregnancy, Emma could no longer ignore the quiet changes in her marriage. They weren't loud enough to be called fights, not sharp enough to leave visible wounds, but they settled into her chest like a constant pressure. Ryan was still there in body, still kissed her cheek before leaving for work, still asked if she needed anything, but something essential was missing. Presence, warmth, truth. It began with small excuses. Meetings that ran late. Business dinners that couldn't be avoided. "You know how competitive things are right now," he told her one evening as he slipped on his jacket. "If I don't show commitment, someone else will." Emma nodded, forcing a smile, even as disappointment tugged at her. She had cooked his favorite meal, lit candles, imagined a quiet night together. The food went cold while she ate alone, listening to the clock tick too loudly in the dining room. Ryan's phone became an extension of his hand. He took calls in the hallway, his voice lowered. If Emma entered the room, he'd pause, turn away, or say quickly, "I'll call you back." Once, she asked gently, "Who was that?" Ryan didn't look at her when he replied, "Just work." His tone was flat, final. At night, he stayed awake long after she fell asleep or pretended to. Emma would feel the mattress shift as he turned away, scrolling endlessly, his face illuminated by a pale blue glow. When she reached for him, he stiffened slightly before relaxing, as though reminding himself to play a role. Her body was changing, growing heavier, slower. Some mornings she woke nauseous and exhausted, her back aching, her feet swollen. Ryan listened politely but without interest. "You should rest more," he said once, irritation slipping into his voice. "You're always tired lately." She wanted to ask if he remembered she was carrying their child, but the words stayed lodged in her throat. The loneliness crept in quietly. Emma spent more time at her father's estate during the day, walking through familiar halls, sitting in the garden where her mother once planted roses. Mr. Hale watched her closely. He noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way she paused before answering simple questions. "You're welcome to move back here if you need to," he said one afternoon as they sat together. Emma shook her head quickly. "No, Dad. Ryan and I are fine. Just adjusting." The lie tasted bitter, but she swallowed it. The truth found her on a rainy Thursday evening. Ryan had told her he'd be working late again. Emma felt restless, uneasy. She decided to surprise him with dinner. Something warm, something familiar. Maybe it would remind him of them. She packed the food carefully, wrapped her coat around her belly, and drove to his office. The building was nearly empty when she arrived. The receptionist had already left. Lights glowed on the upper floor. Emma rode the elevator slowly, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. As she approached Ryan's office, she heard laughter. A woman's laughter. Soft, intimate. She stopped just outside the door. Ryan's voice followed, lower, playful. "You shouldn't say things like that," he murmured. There was a pause, then the unmistakable sound of a kiss. Emma's breath caught painfully in her chest. She pushed the door open. Ryan sprang back as if burned. A woman stood beside him, her hand still resting on his arm. She was beautiful in a polished, effortless way. And she was wearing lipstick. The exact shade Emma recognized instantly. The same shade her best friend Lily always wore. Emma's eyes dropped to Ryan's jacket draped over the chair. A smear of that same color marked the collar. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Emma whispered, "How long?" Ryan didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't plan for you to find out like this." Lily stepped back, suddenly awkward. "Emma, I don't," Emma said softly. Her voice shook, but she stood tall. "Please don't explain." Ryan's face hardened. "This isn't what it looks like," he began, then stopped himself, almost annoyed. "Actually, it is. But you have to understand, things changed." Emma stared at him, disbelief flooding her. "Changed," she echoed. "I'm pregnant with your child." "And that's exactly it," Ryan snapped. "Everything became about the baby. You stopped being you. You're always tired, always emotional. I felt invisible in my own marriage." The words sliced deeper than she expected. "So you cheated," she said quietly. "With my best friend." Ryan shrugged, a gesture that shattered whatever remained of her heart. "I needed something different. Someone who reminded me I'm still alive." Emma laughed once, a hollow sound. "You're blaming me," she said, realization dawning. "You're blaming me for carrying our child." Lily grabbed her purse, tears forming. "I'm sorry," she whispered before rushing past Emma without another word. Emma turned back to Ryan. She searched his face for remorse, for guilt, for anything resembling the man she married. She found none. "I'm leaving," she said simply. Ryan scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. Where will you go?" Emma's eyes burned, but her voice remained steady. "Anywhere that isn't here." She drove straight to her father's mansion that night. Rain streaked down the windshield as tears blurred her vision. She didn't call ahead. She didn't explain. She walked into the familiar house and finally collapsed, sobbing into the arms of the only man who had never betrayed her. Mr. Hale didn't ask questions. He held her, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with fury. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "I already know." Emma shook her head against his chest. "I didn't want you to find out like this." He stroked her hair gently. "Some truths don't wait for permission." That night, as Emma cried herself to sleep in her childhood bedroom, Ryan sat alone in his office, staring at his phone. Lily hadn't replied to his messages. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his mind, not guilt, but fear. He had crossed a line he could not uncross. And though he didn't yet understand it, the choices he'd made were already setting something far greater into motion. Unseen, unannounced, and irreversible. The days after Emma returned to her father's house passed in a blur of quiet routines and unspoken grief. The mansion, once too large and echoing, now felt like a shelter. Emma moved slowly, her body heavy not just with pregnancy but with heartbreak. She avoided mirrors, avoided her phone, avoided thinking about the life she had believed in so completely. Mr. Hale gave her space, but he never left her alone for long. He made sure she ate, accompanied her on short walks through the garden, and sat with her in silence when words failed. Ryan called the next morning. Emma didn't answer. He sent messages, some apologetic, others defensive. When that didn't work, he showed up at the gates of the estate. Mr. Hale had already instructed security not to let him in. That evening, as they sat across from each other in the study, Mr. Hale finally spoke about Ryan. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was a weight to it Emma had never heard before. "I never trusted him," he said quietly. "Not because of where he came from. Because of how he looked at what he wanted." Emma flinched. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I tried," Mr. Hale replied. "But love makes its own arguments. You wouldn't have listened, and I would have lost you in the process." Emma nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "I feel foolish." "You were faithful," her father said firmly. "There is nothing foolish about that." Ryan didn't give up easily. Days later, he managed to arrange a dinner under the guise of reconciliation. He called Mr. Hale directly, his tone respectful, almost humble. "Sir, I've made mistakes," he said. "I'd like the chance to make things right. For Emma, for the baby." Against Emma's wishes, Mr. Hale agreed. The dinner was set at the estate, formal but restrained. Ryan arrived with flowers and an apology rehearsed to perfection. He looked thinner, more subdued, as though regret had finally caught up with him. Emma watched him carefully, her heart aching with memories she could not erase. Throughout the meal, Mr. Hale spoke calmly, steering the conversation toward values rather than accusations. "A marriage," he said evenly, "is not tested when things are easy. It's tested when responsibility arrives." Ryan nodded vigorously. "I see that now," he said. "I let temptation cloud my judgment. But I love Emma. I want to be a good husband. A good father." Emma listened in silence. Mr. Hale studied him. "Love," he said, "is not measured by promises after betrayal. It's measured by restraint before it." Ryan swallowed. "I know I failed," he said softly. "But I'm asking for another chance." There was something about his eyes, too calculating, too eager, that confirmed everything Mr. Hale already knew. This was not remorse. It was damage control. Still, Mr. Hale nodded. "Then you'll prove it," he said. "Not with words, with actions." Ryan left that night believing he had won. He sent Emma messages afterward, assuring her they could rebuild, that the affair was over. Emma read them without replying. Something inside her had hardened, not into bitterness, but clarity. Behind closed doors, Mr. Hale moved quietly. He contacted his lawyers the following week. Long meetings took place in the study while Emma rested upstairs. Documents were reviewed, clauses discussed, revisions drafted. Mr. Hale listened carefully, his face unreadable. When the final changes were made, he signed without hesitation. He did not tell Emma. To her, he remained the same steady presence. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments when Ryan failed to show. He listened when she spoke of fear of raising a child alone, fear of trusting again. He never pushed her toward forgiveness or revenge. He only said, "You will be protected." Ryan, unaware of what had been set in motion, began to relax. He assumed Emma's silence meant she was processing, softening. He talked openly about future plans again, about moving closer to the estate, about opportunities that could open up once Mr. Hale's influence came into play. He never asked what Emma wanted. He assumed it would align with his own. Then, one morning, everything changed. Mr. Hale collapsed during his morning walk. By the time Emma reached the hospital, it was too late. A heart condition, the doctors said. Sudden, unpredictable. Emma's grief was overwhelming. She held her father's hand long after life had left it, whispering apologies she didn't need to make. The world felt suddenly unstable, as though the ground beneath her had vanished. Ryan arrived later, his expression solemn, his arm around Emma's shoulders. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly, but his eyes wandered. Calculating, measuring. The days that followed were filled with condolences, black clothing, and quiet conversations behind closed doors. Emma moved through them like a ghost. Ryan stayed close, playing the role of devoted husband with careful precision. What Emma didn't see was how Ryan began to ask questions. About accounts, about assets, about timelines. He spoke to lawyers with an interest that bordered on impatience. He assumed his place beside Emma guaranteed his future. The will reading was scheduled for weeks later. In the meantime, Emma focused on survival. She spoke to her unborn child at night, her hands resting on her belly. "We'll be okay," she whispered. No matter what. She didn't know what her father had done. She didn't know how carefully he had planned. But somewhere between grief and healing, a sense of quiet strength began to return. Mr. Hale's silence, she would soon learn, was not absence. It was preparation. The morning of the will reading arrived wrapped in a cold, deliberate stillness. Emma woke before dawn, her body heavy, her mind restless. Sleep had been shallow for weeks, interrupted by grief, memories, and the constant movement of the child inside her, as if he sensed the tension in her heart. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, listening to the faint sounds of the house waking up. This house had always felt permanent, unchanging. Now, it felt like a place holding its breath. Ryan knocked lightly before entering. He had already dressed carefully in a dark suit, his hair neatly styled, his expression solemn in a way that looked practiced. He smiled when he saw her awake. "I thought you might still be sleeping," he said softly. Emma sat up slowly. "I couldn't." He moved closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. The touch felt foreign now, intrusive. She resisted the urge to pull away. Today required composure, not conflict. "It'll be quick," Ryan continued. "Just formalities. After that, we can focus on moving forward. Together." Emma looked at him, really looked at him. The confidence in his voice didn't come from reassurance. It came from assumption. He spoke as though the outcome had already been decided, as though the future belonged to him by default. She said nothing. The lawyer's office was quiet and formal, lined with shelves of leather-bound books and polished wood that reflected the muted light from tall windows. A long table dominated the center of the room. Several relatives sat scattered around it, distant cousins, an aunt Emma barely remembered, all wearing expressions of restrained curiosity. Grief mingled with expectation. Ryan guided Emma to a seat beside him, his hand once again resting possessively on hers. She let it stay there, though every instinct told her to pull away. Across the table, the lawyer adjusted his glasses, his face neutral, professional. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Mr. Jonathan Hale," he began. Emma's chest tightened at the sound of her father's name. She folded her hands in her lap, focusing on her breathing. The lawyer proceeded methodically. Smaller bequests came first. Donations to charities, provisions for long-serving staff, trust funds for extended family. Ryan listened with half interest, his attention sharpening only when the lawyer paused, turning a page. "To my daughter, Emma Hale," the lawyer said, "I leave the family estate, including all properties therein, my controlling shares in Hale Industries, and the remainder of my personal savings and investments." A murmur rippled through the room. Ryan's grip on Emma's hand tightened slightly. He leaned closer, whispering, "See. Everything's going to be fine." Emma didn't respond. The lawyer raised a hand gently, signaling for silence. However, he continued. The word landed heavily, like a door closing somewhere. Should Emma Hale remain legally married to Ryan Mercer after the discovery of his infidelity, the aforementioned inheritance shall not be transferred to Mr. Mercer under any circumstances. Instead, all assets shall be placed in a trust under the sole name of Emma Hale's child, to be managed independently until said child reaches legal adulthood. The room went completely still. Ryan's breath caught audibly. "What?" he said before he could stop himself. The lawyer went on, his tone unchanged. "Ryan Mercer is to receive no financial benefit from this estate, directly or indirectly. This clause is irrevocable." Emma felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "You will be protected." Understanding flooded her slowly, painfully, beautifully. Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is insane," he snapped. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," the lawyer replied calmly. "Mr. Hale was very clear." Ryan turned to Emma, his face pale. "You knew about this?" he demanded. Emma shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "But he did." Ryan's confidence collapsed in real time. "This can't be legal," he said, his voice rising. "I'm her husband, and you were unfaithful," the lawyer said evenly. "That fact was documented." Ryan laughed sharply, a sound edged with panic. "So what? Marriages survive affairs all the time." Emma finally pulled her hand away. "Not this one," she said quietly. Ryan stared at her, realization dawning too late. "If you divorce me," he said slowly, "the trust will still belong to our child," Emma finished. "Exactly as my father intended." Silence swallowed the room again. For the first time since Emma had known him, Ryan looked small. Stripped of charm, stripped of leverage, he sat back down slowly, his hands trembling. The lawyer closed the folder. "That concludes the reading." People began to rise, murmuring among themselves, glancing between Emma and Ryan with a mix of shock and fascination. Emma remained seated, her heart pounding, her eyes burning, not with tears, but with something steadier. Ryan leaned toward her, his voice dropping into a desperate whisper. "We can fix this," he said. "We'll stay married. For the baby. For us." Emma turned to him, her gaze calm and unyielding. "There is no us anymore," she said. "And there hasn't been for a while." His mouth opened, but no words came. Outside, the sky was overcast, the air cool against Emma's face as she stepped into the daylight. She inhaled deeply, as though breathing for the first time in months. Her father's absence still hurt, but his presence surrounded her in a way she hadn't expected, in foresight, in protection, in love that outlasted betrayal. Ryan followed her out, his voice cracking. "Emma, please, I made a mistake." She stopped and faced him fully. "No," she said, "you made a choice." She walked away without looking back. Behind her, Ryan stood frozen, the future he'd imagined dissolving before his eyes. The inheritance he'd counted on was gone. The control he thought he held was an illusion. Karma hadn't shouted or struck suddenly. It had waited, and when it spoke, it did so through ink, law, and a father who had loved his daughter enough to see the truth long before she could. Emma filed for divorce 3 days after the will reading. There were no dramatic confrontations, no screaming matches, no final emotional pleas. She signed the papers in her father's study, seated at the same desk where he had once reviewed contracts and made decisions that shaped entire companies. Her hands were steady, her mind was clear. The lawyer explained every clause carefully, but Emma barely needed the guidance. She had already let go. Ryan didn't take it quietly. He showed up unannounced at the estate more than once, demanding to see her. Each time, security turned him away. When that failed, he sent messages that shifted wildly in tone, apologies that turned into accusations, declarations of love that morphed into threats. Emma read none of them. She handed her phone to her lawyer and asked him to handle all communication moving forward. For the first time since her pregnancy began, she felt in control. The divorce proceedings were swift. Ryan contested nothing, not because he suddenly respected Emma's wishes, but because he had nothing to stand on. No claim to the estate, no leverage, no sympathy from the courts once his infidelity was documented. His lawyer advised him to settle quietly before matters became worse. Ryan signed. Emma moved permanently back into her father's estate. The house no longer felt empty. Staff members treated her with gentle respect, as though understanding she was no longer just the quiet daughter but the woman who now carried both grief and responsibility. She redecorated slowly, not to erase the past but to make space for a future. The nursery became her sanctuary. Soft colors, warm light, shelves lined with books her father once loved. At night, she sat in the rocking chair and spoke to her unborn son. She told him stories about his grandfather, about his discipline, his wisdom, his quiet acts of love. She explained, in words he could not yet understand, that he had been protected before he ever took his first breath. Ryan's life unraveled with surprising speed. The woman he had cheated with grew distant once it became clear there would be no inheritance to benefit from. She stopped answering his calls. Friends who once tolerated him for proximity to wealth withdrew politely. Invitations disappeared. Conversations grew shorter. His reputation at work suffered too. Whispers followed him through hallways. Trust, once broken in one place, rarely stayed intact elsewhere. He moved into a smaller apartment, far from the life he had imagined. Nights grew quiet, then lonely. He replayed moments in his mind. Choices he had brushed off as harmless, warnings he had ignored. But regret, when it finally came, felt hollow. It didn't change anything. Emma, meanwhile, grew stronger with each passing week. Pregnancy was no longer something she endured alone. Her father's old friends checked in regularly. Her aunt stayed for weeks at a time. Laughter returned to the house in small doses, tentative at first, then more freely. Emma began to sleep better. Her smile, once forced, became genuine again. On a calm autumn morning, labor began. Emma was taken to the hospital just after sunrise. The pain was intense, grounding, real. With every contraction, she reminded herself she was not alone, not now, not ever. Hours later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, her son was born. When they placed him in her arms, the world narrowed to a single, perfect moment. He was small, warm, and impossibly real. His cry filled the room, strong and determined. Emma laughed through tears as she held him close, her heart expanding in ways she hadn't thought possible. "Hello," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." She named him Jonathan. In the quiet hours that followed, as the hospital room settled into stillness, Emma held her son and felt her father's presence more clearly than ever before. Not in sorrow, but in pride. She kissed Jonathan's forehead and whispered, "Your grandfather made sure you'd never suffer from another man's greed." Months passed. Emma adjusted to motherhood with grace and patience. She learned the rhythms of her son, his cries, his smiles, the way he calmed instantly when she spoke to him softly. She walked the estate grounds with him in her arms, telling him about the trees, the house, the legacy that would one day be his. The trust was managed responsibly, exactly as her father had planned. Emma didn't touch a cent of it for herself. She built her own life, modest and intentional. She returned to passions she had set aside, writing, volunteering, mentoring young women navigating difficult marriages and broken trust. She spoke from experience, not bitterness. Ryan tried once more. He sent a letter, not an email, not a message, a handwritten letter, delivered carefully, as though presentation could soften the words inside. Emma read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer she never opened again. Some endings don't require responses. Years later, Emma watched her son run across the garden lawn, laughing freely. The sun cast long shadows behind him. She felt peace, not because everything had gone perfectly, but because she had survived what could have broken her. She had chosen herself. She had chosen truth. Karma had not arrived with drama or spectacle. It hadn't destroyed Ryan outright. It had simply removed everything he didn't deserve and returned what mattered to the person who did. As Emma smiled at her son, she understood something deeply and completely. Karma doesn't always come fast. But when it does, It comes with precision. And it always knows exactly where to strike.